Log Bait in Clash Royale. It's one of the best decks in the game, but how do you play it? Well, let's find out. This video is for someone that has never played Log Bait before and wants to learn how to play it properly. We will not be going over specific matchups in this video, but instead be going over a general idea of how to play this deck. In this video, we'll be talking about the deck, changes that you can make to the deck, the basic strategy of the deck, what to do in your opening hand, and at the end, I got some tips and tricks that hopefully you can use to win a couple of your first games. This deck has an average elixir cost of 3.3 elixir, making it very, very cheap. The primary win condition in this deck is the Goblin Barrel, and on the defensive side, you got the Hot Inferno Tower, one of the best cards in the game. Shout out to Ash. And pretty much the entire rest of your deck. This deck is all about baiting your opponent's spells. So using the Inferno Tower to bait out your opponent's Zap, using your Princess to bait out your opponent's Log, to use your Goblin Gang to bait out your opponent's arrows, are all ways that you can use this deck to bait out spells, and pretty much is how you're going to win with this deck. But we will be talking more about the baiting element of this deck. Why does that sound so weird? In the strategy section of this video. What are some changes that you can make to this deck? Well, it is a Log Bait deck, so the Goblin Barrel, it's here to stay. Don't touch the Goblin Barrel, it's staple. The first card that you can change in this deck is the Goblin Gang. You can change the Goblin Gang for a Skeleton Army. Yes, the Skeleton Army. It's very, very good. It's very, very powerful card, but it doesn't have the air hitting ability of the Spear Goblins that the Goblin Gang does. I prefer probably the Goblin Gang, but Skarmy works too. Next card that you could change is the Knight, and this is a card that you can change for a lot of different cards. You can change it for the Valkyrie, which I probably would recommend if you're newer to this deck. It's a little bit more versatile, a little bit easier to play than the Knight. It's a little bit more expensive, but I definitely recommend it. Other cards that you can change to, you can change it with the Dark Prince, you can change it for the Rascals, and you can actually also change it for just the normal Prince. All kind of work. Knight's probably the best option for high up ladder, and then Valkyrie's probably your best option if you're new with this deck. Ice Spirit is a key cycled card in this deck, and it's also a defensive card in this deck, and you can change it for another cycle card, which is the Skeletons, or you can even change it for the Fire Spirits. It helps with defense a little bit. It still has a little bit of a bait component, and it works. Could catch your opponent off guard too. I catch you off guard? Well, that's what the Fire Spirits can do in this deck. Next card that you can change in this deck is the Inferno Tower. You can change the Inferno Tower out for the Tesla Tower. I think it's just called the Tesla. Both are very, very good cards in this deck. Both work very, very well, but I would recommend using the one that's the higher level. The next card that you could change in this deck is the Princess. Yes, it's a legendary card. I know a lot of people will not have the Princess and still want to play this deck because it's so sick and so swaggy. Well, you can change the Princess for the Dark Goblin, and you can change it for the Archers. Both work. Both are not as good as the Princess, just because the Princess is just such a it's a very, very important card in this deck. But both work, and you can at least use the Dark Goblin and the Archers as a substitute until you get the Princess. The next card that you can change is the other legendary in this deck, and it's the Log. Yes, the Log. The Log is the best card to have in this deck, but if you do not have the Log unlocked yet, or if it's under level, you can use the arrows, you can use the snowball, or you can use the zap. All three of these work. They're not as good. I would recommend using the one that's the highest level, but use Log if you have it. The last card in this deck that you can change is the Rocket. It's the big spell, the Big Kahuna, and you could change it with another Big Kahuna, also known as the Fireball, or you can actually change it for the Skeleton Barrel. This might not have a lot of longevity with the Skeleton Barrel. I'm saying the Skeleton Barrel right now is because it just got buffed. It's really, really powerful, and you do see a lot of Goblin Barrel, Skeleton Barrel decks right now, but this could change in the meta, so in the future, maybe disregard this if the Skeleton Barrel sucks. But if it's good still, use it. So now it's time to talk about the basic strategy of this deck. And this is a bait deck, but I don't think I've talked about what baiting is in Clash Royale. Baiting is when you use a card that is very, very vulnerable to a spell. So let's say the minion horde gets hit by arrows. It's a very, very good elixir trade, and most people will use that spell to deal with the minion horde in that certain situation. Well, in this deck, it has a very, very similar aspect to it. Capitalizing on the bait mechanic of Clash Royale, using cards like the Goblin Gang and the Princess that many people would either want to log bait, there, that's where it comes from. You use the log on the princess or the goblin gang just because it's a +1 elixir trade for your opponent. And once they use the log, that's when you go in with the goblin barrel. You get mad value with the goblin barrel, and your win condition becomes super, super, super threatening. It works very, very well. Even if your opponent uses the log to deal with your goblin barrel, it is okay because you can use other cards in this deck like the goblin gang and like the princess to put pressure on your opponent, and they could deal a lot of damage too. Continually putting your opponent under pressure, getting a goblin shot here, maybe a princess shot on the tower there, a log hit on your opponent's tower. Brackets, this is known as chip. Little bits of damage that add up over time, where eventually your opponent's tower will get so low you can just shoot a rocket at it, or maybe two, and win the game. It's called spell cycling. So what do you do in your opening hand when you start off a game? Well, the best play to do with this deck is to play the goblin barrel. That's your best move for an opening play with this deck. But if you do not have the goblin barrel in your opening hand, you can use the princess at the bridge, you can use the goblin gang at the bridge, you can use the ice spirit at the bridge, you can use the log at the bridge. Yeah, all these work. Maybe you'll get a couple of chip shots on the tower, and it's a really, really good way, a lot of very low risk way to start off a game and to start your chip on your opponent's tower. Yeah. Now it is time for the best time of the day. It's Cash's tip time. First tip I have for you guys today is to protect your princess. Yes, protect your princess at all costs. The longer your princess stays on the field, the more shots the princess gets, the more value the princess gets, and the more pressure it puts under your opponent, because their tower will never be able to deal with it. They will always have to spend elixir to deal with it. So if you have a princess at the bridge, and let's say your opponent does use a card to deal with it, let's say it's a knight or even a goblins, well, you can use your knight to get in front of the princess to protect your princess from your opponent's knight. Why did I use knight in this example? This is a crucial aspect of this deck, and I definitely recommend protecting your princess at all costs. Next tip I have for you guys is a cautionary tip, and that is using your goblin barrel in the safety spot. Yes, there is a safety spot in Clash Royale for the goblin barrel, and that is on the corner furthest away from your opponent's king tower, on your opponent's tower. Did that make sense? Well, it's right here. It should be highlighted. This tile right here is where you should be throwing your goblin barrel at the beginning of the game, and until you know your opponent does not have a tornado, because if they do have a tornado, they can pull your goblins right onto their king tower. It activates their king tower, and now you have to deal with an activated king tower for the rest of the game, and that can be very, very difficult. So until that you know that they don't have tornado, just keep the barrel in the corner pocket. The next tip I have for you guys today is an offensive tip, and that is to use your goblin barrel low with your log at the same time. It's a very, very powerful wombo combo if your opponent is using, let's say, a card like the Skarmy or the Goblin Gang to deal with your Goblin Barrel. It cleans up all those units, and your goblins do get on tower and gets many stabs. And if, let's say, your opponent plays another card like the knight, why do I keep using knights in my examples? Well, at least you'll get a little push off the log, you'll get a little chip on tower damage, plus it'll get stunned. It's good. It's a good little wombo combo. Definitely try it out. The next tip I have for you guys is to not be scared to rocket. Yes, rocket is a card that is kind of hit or miss. Risk it for the biscuit. If you do miss a rocket, you're going to be in a very, very bad position, but don't be scared to use it. If you can ever get value with the rocket, make sure you do. For example, if your opponent plays a Sparky at the back and you could rocket the Sparky and your opponent's tower, do so. Also, if your opponent plays a Musketeer or any unit where you can somehow get that unit plus the tower, rocket that thing. If your opponent has a giant push or a golem push and there are so many units on top of each other, well, frickin' rocket that thing. If there is a raged up balloon coming at your tower, rocket that thing. If your mom keeps telling you to go to bed, well, rocket that thing. Okay, don't rocket your mom. Okay, I'm getting carried away. Nonetheless, my point is to be, if you can get value with your rocket, make sure you use it. It's a very, very good card in this deck, and definitely get used to using it as much as possible. Also, don't rocket first play, ever. Next tip I have for you guys today is a wombo combo of the Knight and the Goblin Gang at the bridge. Yes, 6 elixir, but it does work if done correctly, of course. If your opponent does have like a Valkyrie or another splash unit, it will not be super powerful. It's actually really bad. But if you time this right and your opponent doesn't have a splash unit, it could put your opponent under a lot of pressure. For example, if they use the Goblin Hut, you can put your opponent under a lot of pressure. It's a very good push, but worst case scenario, you know what? Maybe they just spell it. And then you go with the Goblin Barrel, baby! Bang, 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 bang! The next tip I have for you guys today is probably the tip I should have brought up first. It's probably one of the most important tips, and that is the tricky barrel. Yes, a tricky barrel is when you don't throw the Goblin Barrel right on your opponent's tower. You throw it a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left, a little bit up, a little bit down, just so your opponent maybe misses their spell when they're going for the Goblin Barrel. This doesn't usually work if you're just throwing it by itself, but if you have a Knight tanking for the Goblin Barrel, it could be super powerful, and you could just win a game because of it. One tricky barrel that you should know is playing your Goblin Barrel to the left or right of your opponent's Princess Tower, because this makes it so if they use the Bar Barrel right down the middle, one goblin survives and will get a shot on your opponent's tower. That's good. That's what you want. Next tip I have for you guys today is spell cycle. Yes, spell cycling is a great way for you to finish off your opponent if your opponent's Princess Tower is getting very low. If it's in rocket range, well, use that rocket and take out your opponent's tower. And if it's in, let's say, 2 rocket range, well, you can play a couple of cards on defense. Because this deck is so powerful on defense, set up a Tesla, throw a Knight at the back, throw a Princess, and once you feel comfortable, throw that first rocket, and then use the Goblin Gang. You can use the Ice Spirit, you can use another Tesla, you can go freaking Clash of Clans mode, and you throw another rocket. It's really good way to finish off your opponent, and if you have to throw a couple of logs too, throw them away. Pretty much how you're going to be ending most of your games with this deck. Last tip I have for you guys today is kind of more of like a tip to get better at this deck, and that is try to keep track of your opponent's small spell. Yes, I know it's easier said than done, but it's kind of crucial if you want to be very good with this deck. Any bait deck, you kind of have to be a master of knowing what your opponent's cycle is, what cards they have in their hand, so you know when to go in with your specific cards. Well, a great way to start learning this mechanic, start learning this practice, is to at least keep track of your opponent's small spell. It'll be hard at first, but with enough practice, it could win you so many games. And not only that, it's going to be the difference from you being an okay log bait player to an amazing log bait player. So start doing that as soon as possible. I wish you the best. It's not easy. Good luck. There it is. Now you're a pro at log bait. You're welcome. Okay, no, you're not a pro, but you know what? Hopefully this guide can help you win a couple of your first games using this deck. It's a very powerful deck. It's a very fun deck. It's also a very free to play deck. So if you're a free to play player, definitely give this deck a try, because you can use it from now and wherever you are all the way to #1 in the world. So good luck and have a good journey. If you enjoyed this starter guide, I got 2 starter guides right here. We got the Lava Loon starter guide, and we got the 2.6 Hog Rider starter guide. So if you want to check out one of those decks, learn how to play one of those decks, give that video a check out, because yeah, thank you so much for watching. Love you guys.